Thank our sponsors that include UNESCO, the National Gallery, the African Union, the government of Zimbabwe, as well as our partners, the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, the National Arts Council, Theatre in the Park, Great Zimbabwe University, the National University of Science and Technology, the University of Zimbabwe, as well as Midlands State University. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a round of applause. Without wasting much of our time, let me introduce a very important person insofar as today's events are concerned. A very important person insofar as our gathering here is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you Mr. Raphael Chikukwa. Mr. Raphael Chikukwa is the director. Yes, you can give him a round of applause. Let me give you a just brief bio of Mr. Raphael Chikukwa. Mr. Raphael Chikukwa joined the National Gallery of Zimbabwe in 2010 as the Chief Curator and is now the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. But before joining the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, Mr. Chikukwa worked for over 10 years as an independent curator. Mr. Chikukwa is the founding curator of the Pavilion of Zimbabwe at the Venice Biennial, starting from the 54th up to the 58th edition. In addition to that, Mr. Chikukwa also has participated in various international panels that include Art Basel Hong Kong Conventions of 2019, the Joburg Art Fair. He has also contributed to a number of publications that are too long to mention. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Mr. Chikukwa to the stage.
Mangwana naka naka. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, Dr. Mujeri, for those remarks. My duty is to welcome all the speakers that have come from around the continent, the diaspora, and those that have come from around Zimbabwe, from Bulawayo, Victoria Falls, Midlands, Manicaland, Mashonaland Central, and many other spaces around the country. I'm sure for us as National Gallery of Zimbabwe and as the country, I would also want to recognize the presence of our ministry, Dr. Chitepo, our Permanent Secretary, and other government officials here present. I'm not going to mention our delegates by names, but I would like to say thank you very much for taking time to come to Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for taking time to come from all your schedules and taking this moment for us to be able to deliberate. But firstly, I would like to also give a context of what is the International Conference on African Cultures. The International Conference on African Cultures is a project that was started by our founding father. And here I'm talking about the founding director of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, who is none other than Frank McEwen, a very important figure in the history of the development of art in Zimbabwe and in Africa at large. Who was the former director of the British Council in Paris. He used to look after the Henry Moore Foundation in the United Kingdom. When the idea of the National Gallery was put in place, they had to headhunt for a suitable candidate and Frank McEwen became the suitable candidate. He sailed his way all the way from Paris to the then Rhodesia and become the visionary thinker towards the building. Some of you have seen the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, which was designed by none other than Peter Oldfield. Peter Oldfield was the architect of the building, one of the most modernist buildings that we have in the country. And one of the buildings he designed is none other than the City Library, which is near the ZANU-PF headquarters. One of the most prolific modernist architects that we found in Zimbabwe. There are many other buildings. But at the same time, when he arrived, Frank McEwen, in the then Rhodesia, he had the likes of Sir Stephen Courtauld. Sir Stephen Courtauld became one of the biggest philanthropy for the National Gallery, for he donated a huge entire collection and donated funds to be able to build the National Gallery. And Frank McEwen saw the construction up to the end. And later, tokutambira mseyangu, ibatsirei kuisa maoko. Mtenesano. These are the other reasons why we're here. So to continue with Frank McEwen, later, after he became the director, he founded the National Gallery School of Visual Arts, which was the school workshop, which was just behind the National Gallery. At the same time, in 1962, Frank McEwen was the founder of the International Congress on African Cultures. Then other delegates that came for that conference included the founding director of MoMA, none other than Alfred Barr, the ICI director, Roland Penrose, and you had our own people who came from across Africa. Selby Mvuse, who is one of the African modernist painters from South Africa, was present in the conference. The founding father of Zimbabwe, who is none other than RG, the late Mugabe, was part and parcel of the people who were actually attending the conference. The other people included Vincent Kofi from Ghana, and many other people that came as far as Ivory Coast. You had the Caribbean Steel Band that traveled all the way from the Caribbean to come and became part of the International Congress on African Cultures. So that drew many people, museum professionals from around Europe, France, Germany, and the United States, and many other parts of Europe that came for the conference. When I joined the National Gallery in 2010, it was then when I found an archive that also was an inspiration for us to be able to stage another international conference on African cultures. The idea was to stage it in 2012, but it wasn't the right moment. It was after we had our Zimbabwe pavilion in 2011, so we thought it was an opportunity to actually have the conference. But unfortunately, it wasn't the right time, and the right time became 2017, when the National Gallery was celebrating 60 years. My former director, Mrs. Doreen Sibanda, was very influential in this, including my team, which then included Thomas Pasirai, who was my assistant curator, Tandazani Lakama, who is now at the Zaitsmoka, and many other team members who I still have in the gallery. Some have migrated to other opportunities, but I would like to say Thomas Pasirai, including Tandazani and many others, were part and parcel of the think tank of how we managed to stage the International Conference on African Cultures. And one of the delegates included Mozechi Kowero, who is here, arrived on Sunday from United States, and Jimmy Ogonga, Mzee Ogonga Mutoto, wa Kenya, who is going to arrive tomorrow. So kesho, mzee wa Kenya, Mzee Jimmy Ogonga, will arrive from Livingstone, where he's taking up a residency in Livingstone. We thought it was an opportune moment for him to come all the way from Kenya, where he's residing in Malindi. One of the key speakers at that conference was also none other than one of the most important person I respected, is none other than the late BC Silva. So, to my sister BC, you left us too early. In Shona, they say, "Muriono naka ogaremundiro." The vegetables that taste good, they don't stay in the plate. They always get finished before the ugali is done. And BC Silva, she left us a few years ago to join the ancestors. So I would also want to dedicate this to BC, because when I was living in London, it was BC who said, "Go back to Zimbabwe. Don't stay here. Zimbabwe needs you." And I took a cue from BC in one of our coffee meetings at the ICI in London. All the time before she left Lagos, she would call me and say, "I'm arriving, let's have coffee." But it was because she is a sister who contributed immensely to the visibility of artists, curators across the continent and the diaspora. And unfortunately, she joined the ancestors early, but we are all on our way. But one of the most important things I would like to say, the International Conference on African Cultures this year, when we mooted the idea, my former director, Mrs. Doreen Sibanda, was with us. And I remember sharing this with other people across the continent and across the diaspora, that the theme of the conference, which was supposed to take place in 2020, was going to be Africa Speaks, confronting restitution and repatriation of artifacts from an African perspective. The idea was to look at the human remains, objects, and archives. Why are we looking at the repatriation, and why repatriation now? This is why we are all here. To be able to deliberate on these issues, because these discussions and these deliberations have remained in the West. It is up to us as the continent to deliberate on these issues, because it is about our heritage, it is about our objects, it is about our human remains, our ancestors who were killed during the colonial period and repatriated and taken as souvenirs from the empire. It is up to us to be able to chart the way forward. We cannot remain passengers in our own ship, for we've done that for too long. And we must be aware that Africa has contributed immensely to the global arts, but it has not been able to harness its contributions. But we cannot continue to blame the West, because we have not taken the position. Africa needs to take its position on these deliberations. We know, and we are very much aware, that there are archives dotted around the so-called museums in the West. And it is up to us, and I was deliberating with Professor Mukwei, with Frida, the day when they arrived on Sunday, about, is the word museum, is it a Western concept or is it an African concept? We need to answer to that. Remember, museums were here before the Westerns arrived here. The pyramids of Giza in Egypt, the great Zimbabwe ruins, which I'm sure some of you, if you have not had an opportunity to visit, these are our ancient cities, including those that are dotted around the continent, the Naletale, the Mapungubwe. And how come we want to say that museums are a Western concept? We need to question and interrogate what we are thinking is a Western concept. It can only be us that can interrogate those issues from our own perspectives, because we need to set the record clear. We know that the John Cotton Donner, who founded the American Museums, is regarded to be one of the key person or the key personalities of the so-called museums in the American history and within the Western histories. But what do we have to show? What has been looted from the continent, it was because there were museums, the king's palaces that were dotted around Benin, that were dotted around Jene, that were dotted around Mapungubwe, that were dotted around Jene, Guruswa in Ethiopia. Were there not museums before the Western did what we call cultural genocide and the human genocide that contributed to the whole slave trade? Were there not museums? We need to ask ourselves those questions. So, in my own view, this is why we are here as Africans. It is important for us to deliberate these in the African soil. It is important not for us to be apologetic about who we are as Africans. We know that when we go outside, we are always very apologetic about it. But this is why the International Conference on African Culture has been brought to us here in Zimbabwe. And I would like to thank all the delegates that have come, because it is important for us to be able to do this in the African soil. It is important that all these issues are interrogated here. As we charter the way forward, it is us. Bob Marley says, none but ourselves. And those songs by Bob Marley and other musicians across the continent are not just songs. They are songs of freedom. They are songs to inspire our thinking. The filmmakers that are here, the visual artists that are here, what you give us as academics and all the media and everything, you give us your soul. But we need to interrogate that souls here together as one. My chairman, Dr. Solomon Guramatunu, has been a very inspirational figure. I would like to thank you for you have stood with us for a long time to be able to deliberate. So with those words, I would like to say, asante sana, karimambo Africa, karimambo, aluta continua, aluta, because the struggle is not over yet. The struggle continues. The struggle continues for us to be able to deliberate on these issues. I'll leave this to all of us to see the possibilities. The possibilities are endless, but it's none but ourselves. I would like to say, asante sana. Tene sana. Vamkwat. Tinotenda, siyabonga kakulu. Asante sana. Tatenda. Kiyalebuka.
Thank you very much, Director. Let's give him another round of applause. And I'm asking you to give him this round of applause because I'm a historian. And as I was sitting there, I couldn't resist but marvel at the lecture that he was giving us. A concise history of how Africans have struggled to claim their heritage, to get stolen artifacts restituted, how we have struggled to define and redefine what a museum is and what heritage is. Ladies and gentlemen, I think after these welcoming remarks, I think Africa will speak, and Africa will continue to speak, and Africa will speak loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for the director. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I wish to recall the director to the stage to introduce to us the first keynote speaker for the day. Director.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. My duty is very simple. I want to introduce to you a very special person, special to the African continent, special to the diaspora, who is none other than Professor Mukwege. Professor Mukwege, she is stationed in Washington, D.C., where she is one of the key personalities in the film. But not only that, but I want to say she is a daughter of the Barotse King. For those who are very much aware about the Barotse land, just our neighbors across the Zambezi. As a daughter of the Barotse King, she has done a lot of research about the Barotse land, done a lot of research on the African continent. She's stationed in Mexico, but teaching in Washington, D.C. She was also part of the film Cry Freedom. She has contributed immensely to the film industry of this country, of the continent, and she's a big friend of one of our biggest filmmakers in this country, none other than Stephen Chigorimbo, who they've taken an opportunity to reunite during this conference. So the conference is not only about bringing experts, but it's also bringing about reunification of old friends. And Professor Mukwege, we met virtually in the virtual world, just as good as some of the speakers who are here present. We've met virtually. Because of COVID, the virtual world, or the new normal, has provided us with an opportunity. So I would like to say to all of us, welcome to Professor Mukwege. I would like to say Murichani Amai. So help me to welcome Professor Mukwege to the stage. She will give us a keynote to address on the issues we are here today. So, Professor.
Thank you.
Do you want me to lower this?
Yeah, sure. You say hello in Makadi.
Use this one.
Oh. Makadi. I am so happy to be here. I was so nervous because this is basically when you decide to embrace your heritage, you have to live this double life of being a colonized being, which is very hard because you've got to wear all these masks, and being an indigenous son or daughter of the soil, you know, which is who we are as people of African descent. So the nerves are about the fact that what I have to share is so important, because we are definitely in a moment of profound transition. But remember, back in 1986 when I came to Zimbabwe as a 21-year-old, it's been 35 years since I've seen Steve Chigorimbo. Back in 1986, I went to visit my family, my uncle, who was in hospital with this strange, unknown disease that we used to call SLIM. Suddenly, I feel like we're in the same moment. Similar situation in terms of the fact that we don't know the origins. And for me, it wiped out, I would say 50% of my family was HIV and AIDS. So the fact that knowing my history became life, basically, if I didn't do it, I felt like I was going to die because we were dying. So I'm just humbled and so thankful that I can speak to an audience who actually really understand what I'm going to share and the significance of what I'm going to share with regards to the remains and the return and of our objects, our spiritual, ritual objects, our bones. So I'm so thankful to Raphael for allowing me to come and share, and for me to see you back in Zimbabwe, people who I respected profoundly because you had the courage to create a film, thanks to the hard work of Steve Chigarimbo, who was the first person to have the idea that Zimbabwe was going to produce this film about Bantu Stephen Biko. So here we are, back in apartheid. You know, global apartheid. I was in New York City just the other day, and I went to a hotel, and I saw signs all over the place: no vaccine, no service. All over the place. And so suddenly you have this apprehension of going into spaces. And then suddenly you notice that many of the spaces are all white. Downtown, New York City, you can't even go into a restaurant without a COVID vaccination. Pass with the boosters. Forget about even anything else. So I just wanted to start off by just pointing out the significance of this same moment when we have the opportunity to be owners of our own narrative. That's the key, is we have to tell our stories because it's our story to tell. And it's been hijacked for 400 years. And time is up. In my vision, the things that I'm seeing, in the places that I'm going, I'm operating on a time's up agenda. That we have to step up and be responsible for our own narrative. Because the Africa that we want right now is the Africa that we want. This is what we want, what we're dealing with in terms of our dysfunctional governance and all of that kind of stuff. That's what we obviously want because we're not standing up. So, I give you all the greatest respect, and I'm going to just share a little bit. I was going to have a PowerPoint, but it's okay. I'll improvise. I'll be able to share the archive that I was going to share. I think Raphael will find a way for me to share these amazing images. So, before we start, let's just give thanks to our ancestors. I first connected with my ancestors, I would say, back in 1993, when I had a son. And my grandmother came to the house to give him his names and to give him his praise names. And I said, what are praise names? And she said, everybody's got a praise name. You have a name for all the things you do and all the things you are. So when you're a good girl, we'll call you Mbuyu. When you're not a good girl, we'll call you Mbuyu or something else. The naming has a binding power in our African cultures. And so having an African name is so profound because that's the only connection we have right now. Because all of a naming basically has a connection for us in Africa. For me, Mukwai, Mu just means of God, like Muntu, right? The Mu prefix means of God. So I personally believe it's Mwana Matapa. Instead of Mono Matapa, I think the British couldn't do the Mwana, son of, right? So Mukwai, Wabe means joy. It's a song in Barotseland during the flood ritual when we go out in our dugout canoes. All the princesses sing a song, and there's actually a famous song called Kuwabile. Here, it's not on. I'm an actor, I can project. You can hear me, right? Yeah. So, Mukwai, Wabe, Mukwai just means princess. Wabe, Mbile, which means the second, Bantu Congo, Siolwe, which is Xhosa. Because my father's father came from this side, actually, the Xhosa community here in Zimbabwe. Yes. Yes, Fengu. Exactly. So, we're all related. And that's the aspect of our Africanness that we have to start to embrace. That we're different, and we celebrate our difference, but we are all related through blood and kinship. So, in the spirit of that, I'm going to pour a libation. And please, as I pour, shout out your ancestor. Let them hear us. Because the thing about us as Africans, our culture is performative. It's performative, meaning we pronounce things like we do today. We pronounce that Africa is going to speak about reparations and all of this, restitution and the repatriation of our artifacts. We speak it. And in this speech act is the belief system that is underneath it, that makes it happen. That's called Ashe in West Africa. Ashe, the power to make it happen, make something happen. And in Barotsi land, we say, when we're in the floodplain, when we're communing with the universe, you know? So, first I want to lift up to my ancestor, King Luvosi Liwanika of Barotsi land, who had the courage enough to fight the British when they tried to annex his land and to try to maintain our sovereignty. Ashe.
Ashe.
I better pour it in here. Another one. Please, somebody lift. Give me somebody to lift up. Please, come. Two hands. We give it two hands, don't we?
Kunemi vamati mana enyika mauya pano madambe riri pano pane zvichaitika mazuva matatu anotevera. Tinoti tungamirirai vose vabva mativi mana nekumafungautsi, vabva Nairobi, vabva Botswana, vabva Namibia, vabva Zambia, vabva kwose kwakasiyana siyana. Ndizvozvi zvataudzwa nekwamuri mutendesano wavamukwati uko. Tinoti ndiroro kwamuri, mutibetsera.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Thank you, Raphael. So the Africa we want, how do we get there? I'm going to give a little bit of an auto-ethnographic perspective. Auto-ethnography is the collapse between ethnography, which is the study of people, and biography, which is the study of me. So I'm going to share my own some of my own personal perspectives on how I basically came to the conclusion that the Africa that I want, I have to work for it. It's not just going to come just like that. And so I dedicated like 20 years of life just doing as much research as possible. So, if there are any Royal Majesties in here, Royal Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished diplomats, distinguished guests, patriots, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, this work of unraveling and extracting ourselves from the ravages of colonialism and imperialism and their racist residue cannot be minimized. These complex systems impact our lives as Black bodies. They impact our lives profoundly, and we are actually facing another challenge in what appears to be a reemergence of a global apartheid system and silent cultural genocide. I'm stating the obvious, but I think we need to reflect on this term, cultural genocide, coined by a lawyer called Raphael Lemkin in 1944. after, of course, the Second World War and the genocide of the Jews in Eastern Europe, in Germany and in Europe. So he defines genocide, cultural genocide, as acts and measures undertaken to destroy nations or ethnic groups' culture through spiritual, national, cultural destruction. Since the height of the Atlantic slave trade, where between the years of 1650 and 1900, historians estimate that at least 12 million Africans were forcibly removed from Central, West, and East Africa. This Holocaust, maafa, in Kiswahili it means tragedy, across this circumtransatlantic, justified a knowledge production to diminish the humanity of enslaved Africans in New Europe, what they like to call the New World. And transatlantic slavery and colonialism would distort every aspect of African religion, law, love, war, politics, death, education, health, and much more. Therefore, being an African in Africa or anywhere in the world is a complicated experience more often than not, and a life-threatening affair in too many instances. We suffer daily to make meaning of the orchestrated chaos in our lives in the diaspora. The colonization of Africa would begin its 100+ years of constant conflict to mask the continued expropriation and removal of all of its contents: people, animals, minerals, plants. For the majority, the removal of African sacred ritual performing objects, Europeans like to call art, and human remains in this context have been a rupture of our cultural memory. As legitimate technologies and mediums of communication, these artifacts were born out of our relationship over time between ourselves and our ancestors, deities, land, and all its resources of animals, minerals, the cosmos, and beyond. You can't just recreate what took thousands of years to create. The objects stand in for our ethos, what we believe, our worldview over time, allowing us the opportunity to make meaning of the material and spiritual worlds and to be in harmony, because our world, our African holistic perspective and worldview, is a unified entity. And to be in harmony with the world as we see is part of who we are. However, even when we are in possession of these cultural objects and artifacts, our colonial mental shackles sometimes will not guarantee that after we obtain and participate with these objects that the West is beginning to bring back, we will have enough self-worth to value ourselves as part of them. Value ourselves as part of them. You know, that aspect of us being part of the whole, which is the antithesis of a European perspective that continues to see things as separate. You know, Cartesian, non-linear, or linear rather. So what the West, after their return, will find, they might find new ways, the West, to morph and shift the ownership of these objects with their continued access for purposes of exhibition. It would be a shame if they found new ways to obstruct and dominate and appropriate these artifacts and human remains. I really hope not this time around. Without these tools and their accompanying performatives, with their binding power of orature. You see, orature for Africans, they told us that we had no history because we had no written text, which is not true at all. We have cosmograms, we have Andinkra, that's a written text. So we as Africans have been dysfunctional and confused about who we are, where we came from, and where we want to go. This reality is not just a problem for us just to sit and discuss, but an actual reality that we must dedicate ourselves to with vigor and passion. And we must be held accountable by future generations for the actions we took to correct and resurrect our worldview. As chairperson general of the Barotse National Freedom Alliance, an umbrella organization we created as a way to actualize the BNC National Council resolutions, and also as the chair of Africa and the Middle East for the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organizations in Brussels, as well as a princess of the Liana dynasty of Barotse land, an artist and a scholar, I chose to engage with the ritual objects and archives that kept discovering me. Once you enter into that metaphysical realm, you know, as Africans, don't you? It's another world. It's another world completely. Spirit world. So I chose to engage with the ritual objects, and it became totally out of my control, and I just decided to throw caution to the wind and follow my ancestral guides as a way to embrace and enter into that metaphysical realm, that noumenal plane of spirits and the true spirit of things. So I followed my ancestral guides. I entered into this metaphysical realm of our ancestors to intercede on our behalf for the liberation of Barotse land. And the liberation of Barotse land is not about being anti-Zambian. Because for me, who can trace my ancestors to 1200, the names, where they were, where they stayed, all their children are, I'm still connected to people who had 42 children. My great-grandfather had 42 kids, great-great-grandfather. So it's a nation. So for me, to deny that, how are we Africans if we deny our ancestral culture and history? And that's happening in many places in Africa where First Nations, these first empires and nations that were in Africa, are being marginalized and are being persecuted in their own countries. So how can we now persuade ourselves to be more fluid in our identity, and most definitely to start to discredit our colonial identity in some profound way? It's happened many times. In 1969, it happened in the United States with the black movement. 1969 was a huge year for black consciousness in the United States and all over the world. So I'm feeling that this might be another time for us to have one of those renaissance, where we take a good look at who we are. And if necessary, because remember, names have a binding power. When you change the name of Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, did that make a difference? It did, didn't it? It made a huge difference into how you perceive yourself. So when Malcolm X decided that he was going to change Malcolm Little to the X, that symbol meant he was telling himself that he is not the child of a slave, that he is a free man. He's going to be self-determined. He will have self-determination. So if this exercise that we're doing about addressing our objects that were stolen, it has to come with what are we going to do with those objects when they come? We have to use them to perform. If they are performative, they have to speak. We have to give them life again. And that's going to require a certain kind of courage, to be able to start to question things that seem perfectly normal, certain things that we take for granted, that, oh, it's always been like that. We've always been Christians. We've always been Zambians. And we haven't. And so a couple years ago, when I started to do the research, it really, like I said, started with my son, and then one thing led to another, but it was my intention. Intent? It was the intention, and intention is pure energy. Because what you believe, what you put in your mind, and what comes out of your mouth, what you speak, comes to life. So if we as Africans are continuously going to complain about the fact that, whoa, we think life is so hard for us, that we have to change it. But it has to come from a pure intention. And I've learned that by having a pure intention about the fact that I refuse to allow my heritage to die and be just taken over. Because the situation for us in Barotse land is that at this moment, the World Heritage, the UNESCO has declared Barotse land a World Heritage Site. Basically, they bribed a bunch of Indunas and our king to support the idea that to crush the Barotse national movement. And so what are they going to do? They're going to make the Barotse floodplains a World Heritage Site, and they're going to change the name of the Barotse. This is the Bulozi. It's been there for a long time. They want to change it to be the Zambezi floodplain. And what does that do? It erases us off the map. On top of that, there's a new company that you all must pay attention to, because they also have interests here in Zimbabwe, is the African Parks. This is a multinational corporation that front themselves as a non-profit NGO, who are run from Switzerland and South Africa. As far as I remember, there's not one single black person on their true board of directors. The president and the chair of their board is Prince Harry. He came, he did his publicity while he was here, right? But what they're doing is they basically persuaded all of our local leaders, traditional leaders, to hand over the land rights of national parks. So what does that mean? What's the next step? So we're going to be foreigners in our own land soon, if we don't wake up. Because for Barotse land, we've been doing this, and many others, because as a chairperson of the UNPO, I'm in conversation with Biafrans all the time, with Yoruba Nation, Kabylia, Somaliland, basically all of the nations that were destroyed because of the Berlin Treaty of 1884 and the Treaty of Versailles, Second World War, right? So what we have is a profound mission. And once you walk that path, once you step into that realm of deciding that, you know what, I'm definitely going to do something about making sure that we do not get recolonized, which is what's going to happen. Because Jeff Bezos and people like that, they're on these boards. They want to turn Africa into Disneyland. And guess who are going to be the props? We're going to be the props. They're going to be going around in the little buggies, safari. And we're just going to be. So I can honestly say that when you know who you are, you don't take shit from anybody. Excuse my French. You don't. And that's the point that you have to get to in your consciousness, is that you don't take it from anybody. Because if we continue to smile and show our teeth, I'm sorry, I'm speaking very plainly right now, and I must. If we continue to show our teeth and acquiesce to the plan that people have for us, because remember, when people show you who they are, believe them. So we've been shown who people are for the last 400 years. Game over. Who said that? Mario. Game over. We cannot do it anymore, because we are the last generation who will even speak our languages. Because if Disneyland comes to here, it's over. So these board members, this Liua, the first national reserve for animals in southern Africa, founded by my great-great-grandfather, King Liuanika, to accommodate the vast herds of wildebeest coming from our cousins in Angola, was created out of his respect for the natural resources of his kingdom. So kingdoms like Benin, Barotseland, and many other kingdoms have been custodians of their land and cultural heritage for a long time, but they're trapped in a profound tangle of the double oppression of the West and the nation states that the West created, who have not yet found a way to embrace their indigenous identities, including our governance of our own territories after the British abrogated these treaties. So, the first return of the first bronzes has already occurred. Thank God for the master of Jesus College, Cambridge. But isn't it amazing that she happened to be a black woman? It would never have happened before. It would never have happened. But the universe is telling us something, you know? So the return of these objects is not just for show. We're in a spiritual battle. I mean, even just me organizing, coming here, doing this thingy, doing this beautiful symposium, having this conversation, I had so much pushback from the universe because I'm in tune with the problem. You know? I mean, literally, electricity's not working, the lights are flashing in my room at the hotel. No, really, plugs get blown up as I'm writing this thing. So you know there's some pushback. So, finally, this first return of the bronzes has already occurred, with the famous Benin bronzes taking the spotlight for now, because we don't want it all to be about Benin bronze. We want it to be about other things too. With the return of Okuko, the cock, who represents, he's a male chicken. But like, I understand that symbolism, because we have the same symbolism in Barotseland. In Barotseland, we have spaces of power for women. We have a man rules the north, he's the Litunga, and traditionally, a woman rules the south, and she's the Litunga Lamboela, and a regent princess rules the middle kingdom. It's a pharaonic system. And we still have it, but we're holding on with our nails. We need support. We need people to start to recognize and appreciate that these spaces are basically the repositories of a lot of our culture. And so if we allow these spaces to be taken over, we lose language, we lose customs, we lose everything. So this first Benin bronze, Okuko, who represents the Queen Mother of Benin, was returned on who was taken on February the 27th, 1897, was returned on something like October the 21st, 2021. So, miracles happen. And her return makes me believe that there is a supreme design. Finally, what is the Africa that we want? I really want to know from you, now that I've shared with you from a very unique perspective, because my perspective is not just about being part of the Barotse royal establishment, not establishment, the royal Barotse monarchy, but also the fact that I grew up in Russia, in Egypt. So I saw as a child firsthand, I could see that the hieroglyphs and the Egyptian sculpture and all of the Egyptian artifacts were me. I could see myself in them. I recognized aspects of my own Barotse culture with the dugout canoes and all of that, you know, and the symbolism of the Horus, which is part of your culture here, of the falcon, of the hawk. Yes, you know, that's straight out of Egypt, of the Nile civilization, and we know that Zimbabwe and Barotseland, we are partly Nilotic people. We've already got Evans Pritchard, a bunch of people have already, you know, Barotse people, we're related to the Noor. So as Africans, there's no beginning and there's no end to who we are, because we don't segregate our identity. And so when I talk about Barotse is not a pure people. Barotse is a multi-ethnic, multilingual group of 30 to 40 different ethnic groups. But it's the name that we chose because it reflects the place that we stay. It reflects our relationship to the land. So, finally, I just want you to put in your mind, what would you contribute to this exercise about repatriation, would you decide to go to the village and try to support your family in the village to make sure that that lifestyle continues? Not in poverty, but because of the fact that it's a good lifestyle. The village is a great lifestyle. I myself live in a village in Mexico, you know, because I appreciate that lifestyle, where you're connected to the earth, you have respect for people and animals, and you have a connection to the cosmos. So what are you going to contribute? Are you going to go into your ancestral past? If you're going to have a child, are you going to think about giving them a name that reflects their ancestry? Are you going to start to make decisions that reflect your African worldview and ethos? Because we know, and I know because I lived in Moscow, I've lived all over Northern Europe, as well as Australia and Caribbean and many other places. I know that there's an aspect of the African worldview that's unique. It's unique, and wherever I go, people, whether it's Trinidad and Tobago, even if they didn't know who I was, they call me queen, because that's the respect that they have for women who come from Africa. You know, that's the beautiful thing of going to places all over the world, and when they know that you're an African, like I think there's somebody here who lives in Costa Rica. I think yes. And in Costa Rica, you know, when they found out that I was African, oh my God, the whole city, the whole town literally comes out, because they're still holding on to that ethos and that worldview. That's about Ubuntu. I am because you are. And so that's what I say to Zambian politicians when I see them. I said, you are because I was. Zambia would never have been created if it wasn't because Barotseland was there before. So I'm hoping I've inspired you in some sort of way to join me in embracing our culture fully, you know, and making those decisions about who you're giving your money to. Superficial things like what you're wearing. But I can honestly say these things make me feel really good. You know, when I'm wearing, from my head to my toe, I'm wearing stuff that was only made in Africa by African hands. It's a power. So I really am looking forward to deep conversations, profound resolutions, because resolutions, remember we were talking about performatives. Resolutions, again, an African creation, is that when you resolve to do something, it means that you have pure intention. And when you have a pure energetic intention, it will manifest. Easy. So please, Zimbabwe, rise up and claim your heritage. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to our keynote speaker. I totally agree with her that this conference should be about deep conversations and enduring resolutions. Thank you very much, Professor. Before I speak about the next issue, I forgot to give you a bit about housekeeping issues. The first one being a reminder that COVID-19 pandemic is still with us, and it is a legal requirement that we keep social distance and we cover our mouths and noses with our face masks up to the nose. Make sure that you do that all the time. And our ablution facilities are just behind this building. And if you are in dire need of Wi-Fi, please approach the information desk at the back of the building. In the interest of time, we are going to break now for our health break. But instead of 30 minutes. We are going to break for only 15 minutes. If you haven't finished, I'm told you are allowed to bring your part of your breakfast in the auditorium so that we can proceed with today's proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You've been a very good audience, and let's meet again in 15 minutes' time. Thank you. Sorry, the breakfast is being served just outside the building.